Good evening, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Gessel, and I'm the Director of Public Programs at Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. MOAD is a contemporary art museum, and our exhibitions and programming inspire learning through the global lens of the African diaspora. As we begin, we want to acknowledge the spaces we are occupying. Though we are gathered virtually, we recognize that non-native people to this land are descendants of settler occupiers or those who forcefully were brought to this continent. MOAD occupies the unceded land of the Ramaytush Ohlone people, and we pay our respects to the Ohlone people and their elders, both past and present, who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. We encourage all of you to learn more about the native lands that you occupy by visiting nativeland.ca. I'm thrilled to be presenting the screening of The Queen of Basketball, followed by a discussion with the filmmakers. I'm going to introduce the director to you, who will tell you a little bit more about the film before we screen it. An Academy Award nominated short documentary director and entrepreneur, Ben Proudfoot is the creative force behind Breakwater Studios. He hails from Halifax, Nova Scotia, and is a graduate of the University of Southern California. Proudfoot is an accomplished sleight-of-hand magician and has performed at the Magic Castle in Los Angeles. Welcome, Ben.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I don't have any magic tricks tonight. I hope that's okay. I just wanted to thank everybody for coming tonight. We're really excited to screen our film, The Queen of Basketball. I just wanted to say before we get started, you may have seen or maybe not that Lucia Harris, who's the storyteller in our film, unexpectedly passed away last Tuesday, which was a shock to her family and all of us. So we're kind of in a period of mourning for that. But we feel very fortunate that we had the chance to make this film and for her to see some of its success while she was alive. So wanted to just put that out there before we screen the film. We have a wonderful group, our editor, our producer, cinematographer, producer from the New York Times, and the fabulous filmmaker, Peter Nix, to moderate our discussion and do a Q&A afterwards. So please stick around after the film. And with that, I'll screen the film.
What I know about Lucy? Born in a small town in South Mississippi in 1955. Became a great female basketball player. At one time, was the greatest in the United States. As a matter of fact, the New Orleans Jazz drafted Lucy. The first woman to be officially drafted by a men's basketball team. I don't know what else to say about her. She's retired now and living a happy life.
How would you know?
Because I'm Lucy. Growing up in a pretty much all-black community, everybody knew each other. There was 11 of us, a big family. Next to the last, Lucia May Harris, Lucy. My parents were sharecroppers, so we would pick cotton when we came home from school. That was our way of making a living. I know we went without, but we didn't want for anything. A lot of the kids would gather at our house to play ball. because they didn't have a goal, and we did. I would stay up long past our bedtime and put a quilt over the TV and over my head so I could watch Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, Kareem, Oscar Robertson, my favorite, Lucy. You better go to bed, you got school in the morning. Okay, Mama, I'm going. And I'll watch it a little bit more. I wanted to grow up and have my own family. And I wanted to shoot that ball just like they would shoot it. I was taller than everyone else in my class, 6'3". They would tease me, long and tall, and that's all. That I was tall and I couldn't do anything else. That wasn't true. I became a member of the team, but I didn't know how to play. I had to learn how to play defense, offense, pivot. I did develop a shot. It just came natural. I remember one game, I had scored 40 points. Their whole team had not scored 40 points. My whole attitude changed about my height. It became an asset. Long and tall, and that's not all. 72. Title IX was passed. Whatever you provide for the men, you have to provide for the women also.
I had heard from Mr. Hemphill that, their state was starting a basketball program for women.
Equality. I had made up in my mind that I was gonna go to Alcorn. It's a black school, but they didn't have a women's basketball program. So I changed my mind.
They can play ball when they get here. All that I have to do is put them together as a team.
Being the only black on this team, I had to adjust to that. I wasn't really close to anybody on the team, but once we got on that floor, you couldn't tell. When I got the ball, I knew my job was to score. And more than likely, I would score. Got to the semifinal, the game that determined whether you go on to nationals. And we lost that one game. Man, we were highly upset. And we got together as a team, and we told each other, if we get this far next year, we're gonna go on to the national tournament. Now, NCAA had not taken over then. It was just for the men. Couldn't play with the men. At that time, Larry Bird, Magic, they were NCAA. But women had AIAW, the Association for Intercollegiate Athletics for Women. We went all the way. The name of the team to beat was the Immaculata. They had won 3 national championships. So we had said we were gonna win 3 national championships too. They were undefeated. They had a lot of nuns because that was a Catholic school. Nuns that were cheering for them, and they were beating on buckets. We had a big crowd from Cleveland.
Very noisy group.
It was so loud in there that you couldn't hardly hear anything.
Big number 6'3", the scorer for Delta State, number 45, Lucia Harris. Rounding out the starting five for Immaculata, it's Renee Mew. Margaret Wade, a fine person and an excellent coach. And Margaret, I know your team is very tired. You've had some very...
Most of the time, she wouldn't say anything. She would just open up her jacket. And it said, give them hell.
Here comes the tap. Rosie Adams tosses it up. And it's controlled by Delta.
David brought the ball down the court, passed it to Wanda or Ramona, and they would pass it to me.
Working the ball inside, as they often do, to Lucy Harris.
Oh, they're not going to win. I said, oh, yeah. Really battle. Touch and go there for a while.
And now she gets a chance to hit it again. She misses it. Lucy with a rebound. She's good. Incredible basketball tonight.
Small town team, and we won the game.
And Delta State University's Lady Statesmen have done it. 3 times defending champion Immaculata has been upset tonight, 90-81. Margaret Wade is in tears. We have seen demonstrated here some of the finest basketball skills in the country.
I agree, and it's exciting. I think women's basketball has come of age this week.
A lot of people began to follow the game, a lot of fans.
The men's team draws only half as many fans as the women, who regularly sell out the school's 4,500-seat field house.
We began to travel more. That was the first time that I had flown on an airplane. As a matter of fact, the men didn't fly. Then the women did. I guess the women were bringing in the money. No comment.
Their main weapon is number 45, Lucia Harris. Always a dominating inside force. Her scoring and rebounding is a must if Delta is to claim its second straight national title.
Nobody expected us to win back-to-back championships.
An intense rivalry is built up between Delta and Immaculata. And tonight's game has national supremacy on the line.
So we won.
Championship trophy to Margaret Wade and her Delta State Lady Statesmen.
This year's tournament has been an outstanding success.
Cleveland, a peaceful community in the heart of the Mississippi Delta. A town of friendly people, rich agriculture, and the Lady Statesmen basketball team of Delta State University. Twice national champs after only 4 years of existence as a team.
And I look up to Lucy because she's like the greatest woman player that's ever been. And to me, you know, that's something really great.
I think she's special because she can do about anything. She drives, she rebounds, she jumps, she blocks shots. She's tough.
Lucy, well, she's hard to describe, really. She's like one in a million. I don't think there'll ever be another ball player like her. And to have the personality that she has and be as humble as she is, it's really incredible. It's hard to explain.
Well, attention, you know, to me is saying that a lot of people are interested in what we're doing, you know, and they're keeping up with it, and I think that's good.
Montreal. That was the very first time that women's basketball was placed in the Olympics.
Number 7, Lucia Harris.
It was just unreal. We played Japan, the very first game. They shot the first basket, but they missed. Came back down the court. Ann Myers passed me the ball. I shot it and made it.
That was the first basket in the history of Olympic women's basketball.
And Ann Myers said, that's history. I said, oh yeah? Maybe that is history. Now that's a record that'll never be broken.
Lucia Harris.
We won the silver medal. I wanted my parents to be proud of me, and they were. Make you feel special.
The center for Delta State, a 6'3" senior from Minter City, Mississippi, co-captain number 45, Lucy Harris.
Delta State has won its third consecutive AIAW National Basketball Championship.
I really have enjoyed myself, playing on the last intercollegiate basketball team that I will play on. And we really appreciate what all of you have done. Thank you.
I wanted to keep playing, but there was no place to go. There was no WNBA when I came along. Didn't exist. My high school sweetheart, George, asked me to marry him. I said yes. There are different forms of mental illness. My form is bipolar. It didn't surface until after I stopped playing. Phone ring, someone from New Orleans Jazz calling, looking for Lucy. We want you to come and try out for the team. We had already decided to start a family. I just thought it was a publicity stunt, and I felt like I didn't think I was good enough. Competing against a woman, yes. It's a different story competing against a man. So I decided not to go. And I said no to the NBA. When I realized I don't have a job, to just try to make it, to just try to make a living for myself and for my family. I was looking for a coaching job and just having a feeling of not wanting to be there, not wanting to be where I am. I think it took its toll. I had a nervous breakdown, and I had to return home. I got a job at Amanda Elsie, my old high school, and I became the head coach there. And I began to pick myself up. As the years went on by, it seemed like all of that was a separate life. I never picked up a newspaper to read an article about how good I was. I clipped the newspaper articles out and put them in my scrapbook until after my career was over. That's when I went back and started reading about what I did as a player. Three-time national champions. Olympian. Wow. Very impressive. I have good memories about basketball. The NBA, I don't regret not going. Not even a little bit. Why not? Christopher is a lawyer. Eddie has a master's. Christina received a doctorate. Krista has a doctorate in education, which she received from Delta State. The athletes, all of them. Mama, I didn't know you was a star. I said, yeah, I had my days. If I was a man, then there would have been options for me to go further and play. I certainly would have had money. Would have been able to do a lot of things that I would have wanted to do. Yeah, they're millionaires. Famous. But I wanted to grow up and shoot that ball just like they would shoot it. And I did. As a matter of fact, I was inducted into the Hall of Fame. First female athlete, me and Nero White, escorted by Oscar Robertson, my favorite.
But as far as singling me out, I think there's a lot of other women who are just as great as I am.
Basketball has come a long way. Maybe the world would have known my name had I continued playing. But I didn't, so I don't speculate.
Wow, such a beautiful film. Thank you so much, Ben. I'm going to introduce the rest of our filmmakers, panelists, and then we'll get started with the discussion. So along with director and producer Ben Proudfoot, we have Brandon Somerhalder. He is a cinematographer and producer born in Colorado and raised in the beautiful state of Kansas. Most recently, he was a co-DP on the Oscar-nominated short documentary A Concerto is a Conversation, directed by Chris Bowers and Ben Proudfoot. He was a graduate of the USC School of Cinematic Arts and resides in Los Angeles. We also have Stephanie Owens. Her background spans from creator to curation. As a filmmaker, Owens has an appreciation for stories that are blurry or unexpected and is drawn to explore what it means to be both here and there, a part of and a part. Owens is an editor on The Queen of Basketball. She has an MFA in art and film video from CalArts. A producer of The Queen of Basketball, Lindsay Crouse is also a writer and producer in the opinion section of the New York Times and the co-executive producer of OpDocs, the Times series of short documentaries by independent filmmakers. Drawing on her own experiences as a competitive athlete, she has spearheaded coverage of women athletes at the Times. And moderating tonight's discussion, we have Peter Nix. He is an award-winning cinematographer, director known for his immersive camera work and cinema verite style. He helmed the critically acclaimed feature documentary The Waiting Room and won the 2017 Sundance Film Festival's U.S. Documentary Directing Award for The Force. His most recent film, Homeroom, completes a trilogy of timely, immersive documentaries exploring the interconnected narratives of healthcare, criminal justice, and education in Oakland, California. Welcome, everyone, and I'll turn it over to you, Peter.
Thanks, Elizabeth. It's such an honor to be here. I first just wanted to extend, my condolences. I read that we lost Lucy last week, and I know as a documentarian, we develop really powerful and close relationships with the people who entrust us with their stories. And so I just wanted to, ask you, Ben, how you're doing. That must have been difficult news to hear.
Yeah, thank you. It was. Honestly, I think I was just surprised for like 72 hours. And, I think when I wake up in the morning, I just can't believe it's true. I'm still kind of in that mode. I lost my dad about 1.5 years ago. He also happened to be 66 years old. So I think the overriding thing is just, feeling for Lucy's family. I've been really in close touch with her son, Chris, and his fiance throughout this whole process over the past couple of years, and have made friends with them. So I just, we're just doing everything we can to support the family and really try to, disseminate the photos and the footage that we found to all the news outlets that have been picking up Lucy's story and taking it around the world, which obviously we're excited about despite the circumstances. Well,
now as tragic and difficult as it is, now there's the gift, of this film that you're able to, capture and allow her to tell her story. And it was really, a beautiful film and such a wonderful journey to get to know her. As a story that I didn't know, and I'm a pretty hardcore basketball fan, but that's part of something that this film asks of me, which is how we see our stars and how we see who we're going to shine the light on, how we create our stars. And the story is part of a broader conversation I think that's happening right now, sort of around sort of female athletes in the WNBA in particular. And just big shout out to you, Brandon. The movie was beautifully shot. Concerto also, and Stephanie, I just thought the movie was edited brilliantly. I want to talk a little bit more about the craft, but first, how did you come to this one, Ben? How did you discover this amazing story?
Yeah, so that thread that you mentioned about who gets to be remembered, and why is something that I've been pulling on with Lindsay and my colleagues at the Times and over the past couple of years. And we've been making a lot of different films and finding a lot of different stories like that. And Haley Watson, who's a cinematographer and colleague of mine, just told me the name, Lucia Harris. Look it up. And I Googled Lucy's name, and I just saw this laundry list of one superlative after another, which you see in the film, and then this kind of like, continental shelf of information where it's like there's nothing there. And there had been really no recent interviews of her. And I just like, a woman drafted in the NBA, like, how don't I know about this? And I'm not someone who follows basketball. And that was the question I was asking. And so I picked up the phone and I called Lindsay. And, Lindsay's listened and within 10 seconds said, if you can find her, that's an incredible story. You should do everything you can to see if she wants to tell you her story. And a couple phone calls later, I got a hold of Lucy and I said, here's who I am, and I'd love to come and talk to you. And usually people have a lot of questions. Well, who are you? And send me some films you've made before. And Lucy just said, yeah, no, I've got a big story. Come on over, anytime, come on over anytime. And so Brandon and I was in the middle of the pandemic in July 2020, and we hopped in a van and there was nobody on the road, and we made it to Mississippi in 2 days and just started, figuring out how we were going to interview her without being in the same room and all this sort of production issues. But really it was Lindsay who gave that first, spark that this was a story worth following up on.
And Brandon, had you heard about Lucy? What did you, when you first sort of heard about this, what was your reaction?
Yeah, I had not heard of Lucy, and I am also a huge basketball fan and sports fan, and my mom is a sports encyclopedia, and I called her and she was like, no, I've never heard of her. And I mean, she reads every Sports Illustrated issue since 1972. And so, that was immediately a sign of like, I feel like we probably should have heard of her. And yeah, it was very quickly learned. I mean, we hadn't spoken to her, as Ben said, until we really got her in front of the camera. And so it was really, you drive out there and you bring all the equipment and everything, and you don't really know how it's going to go, or if she's going to be shy or what it is. And then, what happened, and she's just so charming. I remember, we have to change cards every 30 minutes or something like that. And Ben and I looked at each other after the first card, and it's like we were in love with this woman. She's just like so charming and so humble. And you could immediately see how, unfortunately, with no kind of someone to spearhead her campaign of like, here's this story, check out this story, it can get buried because she's so humble and there wasn't any kind of system in order to lift her up. So, it was just one of those stories.
Mm. And Lindsay, the New York Times has been doing such tremendous work in the short documentary space. How do you decide when ideas come to you, or how do you make these decisions about which stories are gonna, translate? Maybe it's not, it's a great story, but there's something more than could live on the page.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great question. I think it's a couple things. The first thing, I mean, especially because I'm also a reporter at the Times and a writer, it's originality and sort of will this surprise me? I mean, one mistake, frankly, that some filmmakers do make with us is they'll see a a feature in the Times, they'll be like, oh, this would be a great documentary. And well, in that case, like for the New York Times, the question is, well, what is the documentary itself bringing to this, bringing that's new to the story, as opposed to just, being a film version of an article. And in the Queen of Basketball's case, and in Ben's case, it had all the ingredients. It had, first of all, that original storytelling, which was just so exciting. I had never heard of Lucy either, and I'm certainly a women's sports writer, reporter. So I was really intrigued by that to begin with. Second of all, we'd already been, as Ben said, working through this framework of who are the stories that are, deeply fascinating, compelling, have some sort of contemporary consequence that we haven't heard yet, and or that have been lost to history, almost as a historical corrective. And this just perfectly fit that mandate. Another thing is the storytelling itself. Like, how are you telling this? And I'm sure Ben will speak to this, but this was before this came after we commissioned it. I mean, the story itself kind of spoke for itself, but when Ben was there, he actually found this trove of, when he was saying there was a continental shelf of information where it just kind of dropped off and there was nothing. Ben found that. He found, again, this trove of information from Delta State, footage, articles, photos, just all of the media that you saw in this film, to bring it to life, to actually bring us onto the court with Lucy and be there in the 70s in that very extraordinary and exciting time. And so all of that just came together to be this almost miraculous op-doc or short documentary that kind of like the gold standard of what we're looking for. So, of course, we were on board from the beginning, just from the story itself, but it was a home run or a slam dunk, so to speak.
Stephanie, speaking of sort of like, the clay on the wheel, and as an editor, I know yours. I don't know how you approach, each film is different. Did you realize at the beginning how much you might, or what you would have to work with, and how did that sort of process? By the way, there are many, many great moments in the film, but I absolutely love the way that you guys open the film with Lucy talking about herself in the third person, and then the reveal that she's talking about herself was so beautiful, and just such an appropriate way to sort of introduce her character. So just appreciation for that.
That was Ben too. So I'm going to give kudos to Ben for that intro. But no, I had no idea the mountain of footage that we were going to have. The interview itself was about 10 hours. So that was a couple of days just digging into that. And then slowly but surely, all this beautiful archival footage started coming in, and it was endless, but in a good way. But it just was like, yeah. So no idea how much we were going to have from when I started. In fact, we thought we might have the issue of needing to find footage, like archival moments, but that was not the case.
And Ben, as you started to realize, what you would have to tell the story, were there any anxieties? I mean, you wouldn't describe yourself as a hardcore NBA fan, right? Like, were you approaching this as a sports drama? How would you categorize it in your mind? How are you thinking about it in terms of genre when you began thinking about how you wanted to tell the story?
Yeah, so no, you're right in not pegging me as an NBA hardcore NBA expert. But to be honest, like, I've had a lifetime of like being at the back of the barbecue as everybody else watches those games, and being like, everyone is so invested in the these characters and the stories and what's happening, and I don't understand the statistics or anything about it. I'm from Nova Scotia. We barely had enough sort of outdoor time to play basketball, and so I'm always frustrated by that, because it looks like such a great time and there's amazing stories and things happening on that court. But I was always kind of like pushed away by like some statistic about like, isn't it amazing that they have this number of whatevers? And so I actually saw this as a fun opportunity to reach everybody who knew nothing about basketball by providing no basic reference whatsoever, and actually providing like a little glossary of terms at the beginning of like offense, defense, you know, like as if you knew nothing about basketball, so that literally everybody, no matter how old you were or how much you knew about basketball, could access the story by watching the film. And it wasn't like a niche specialist thing that only, you know, basketball experts could appreciate. So I liked that as an opportunity.
Yeah.
But I also felt, in terms of anxiety, really where that came from was just the immense responsibility and just imposter syndrome of like really feeling like this was a really enormously important story, and there was no excuse not to do a good job. Lucy told her own story flawlessly with incredible skill. The whole thing was documented with never before seen footage that we found in a box in the archive. Brandon did an amazing job. We had the perfect team. So if anything, the anxiety was, we need to do Lucy's story justice, and we can't do anything less than that. And so that was a big motivation for us to just go to the ends of the earth to make sure the story got told right, succinctly, and that everybody possible could see it.
There was, you know, there is a lot there, and you know, in the short form documentary, you must find a way to make you have to condense and tell the story in a compelling way, but you also have to make the choices of what you're going to leave out. And I noticed that, you know, I felt that you struck just the right balance of providing us with enough context around what Lucy, the significance of who she was and what she was doing at that moment. I'm thinking mostly about sort of Title IX and sort of all that, which is sort of the bread and butter. So what the New York Times does is digging into sort of these, you know, really rich sort of journalistic questions about sort of policy. Was there stuff that you couldn't quite get in there that you wanted to get in there with regards to some of these larger questions, not just about Title IX, but about race? I mean, she was the only, you know, Black player on this all white team, and you know, was this something that that you wrestled with?
Yeah, I'd love to hear from Stephanie too, because there was a lot of things that we talked about whether they should be in or out, and I mean, you know, the Title IX, the passage of Title IX is its whole own story. You see a flash of, you know, Patsy Mink, who is the first, you know, elected woman of color in Congress, whose initiative that was. But like, that's a whole story in and of itself. You know, for Lucy, you know, the biggest chapter that we didn't really get a chance to explore because it's a short, was the period of time after she said no to the NBA until the present. And there's a lot of story in there. In particular, how she was passed over again and again as she sought a job as a coach. And like, that's like a very difficult decade, where after she stopped playing and she tried to get a job as a coach, they just like kept passing over her and choosing, you know, white men on every occasion, one after the next. Even in her hometown, they made her the assistant coach of her high school team in Mississippi. Yeah, this is one of the greatest athletes of the 20th century, full stop. And so that's a whole section of her life that was very difficult to listen to and to digest. That I think, I don't know, Stephanie, how you feel, but I wish people knew that information too. Not that the story isn't wrenching enough as it is.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, that to me is the most obvious part of her story that we just couldn't get in. I mean, we did have a lot of conversations about how much like context do we need to add to her story about the time that she was living in, especially in relation to like maybe what the racial dynamics were. But ultimately, it was really important for us to tell the story that Lucy was telling, and she didn't always go into all of that. So it was important to stay true to that. Like when she talks about her childhood and she talks about, you know, not having much, but not going without, like to me, like that was really important to show that, you know, they may not have had a ton of things, but they had what they needed. And there was richness in that family life with like all the, you know, all the neighborhood kids coming to play because they have the goal.
We've got some questions coming in, so I will relay those. One of them is, congrats to the whole filmmaking team, gorgeous film, so glad to know her name now. And Stephanie and Ben, I'd love to hear what it's like to collaborate on the edit. How long was the whole process, and how do you go back and forth to resolve any differences that might come up in that process? Classic.
I couldn't even tell you how many weeks it was. It was a lot longer than we thought because it went so long that Stephanie, who's a programmer at Sundance, had to go start watching like 25 movies a day or whatever at some point. So it went way over, but I mean, it was many weeks.
Yes.
I don't know, it probably 10 or 12 weeks before Stephanie had to go. More?
No, I think that sounds right to me.
Yeah. And then there was probably another month, I would say, a good month. And also all the time, I mean, there was 15,000 feet of footage that we dropped off in Maryland to get scanned, and it was trickling in all the time. So like, you know, we'd get 2,000 or 3,000 feet. So I hadn't really directly edited something in a while, and this was a very special project, and Stephanie and I were really kind of like, you know, mind meld on it. So I took it from there, and Stephanie and I would meet on the weekends, and I'd show her cuts and stuff, and that's how we finished it. But it was a long time. It was several months until we felt like we had to abandon it.
And Ben, what about I mean, Brandon, what about you know, sort of, you know, that collaboration in the field? What were the discussions in terms of how you wanted to you know, shoot this? I see that there's a sort of style that you guys have in terms of that very intimate. What is it? Is it the it's not called the Errol Morris machine or whatever that was. The Teratron, yeah. What were the conversations around sort of, you know, what you were trying to do with framing her and why and how those decisions were made?
Yeah, I mean, we this is something that Breakwater and Ben use so well in terms of interview style. Is just, you know, it's a device devised by Errol Morris where the subject looks right into the lens, and you know, we get the subject really close just because we believe a lot of people are watching this either on their phone or their computer, and even if they're not, you know, I think we all like seeing those details, and partly out of practicality too. This was shot during the pandemic, and we were, you know, still figuring out how or if to continue shooting, you know, in the summer of 2020. And we had devised a system in which we would never be in the same room as our subject because of this Teratron, which is basically a 2-camera system where I'm projecting Ben's face onto the prompter, and then the prompter is putting Lucy's face onto Ben's, and I'm controlling the camera from a separate room. So it worked out really well practically, and we in that case we never had to risk Lucy, and we could tell her with full confidence. It's like, you know, we can get your story if you're comfortable telling it to us, and there won't be any issues COVID wise. But yeah, in terms of like the creative, it's just being close to her and letting her character kind of shine through in her face. And you know, we would have loved to get more footage of her now and her present day and her family and her kids, but just with COVID, it was restrictive, and we didn't want to push that in any way. So all of the shots that we have of her were far away, and I think it kind of works. It kind of, you know, we leave her in her peace in her cul-de-sac in Mississippi.
And there's a little bit of a follow-up to something we sort of got into a little bit earlier, which was, is there a particular story or something that you couldn't include in the film that you know, wanted to, or just couldn't because of the short format?
Well, for me, I mean, when we were driving there, we were doing a lot of research on her town and obviously the specific region. And I think something that Ben and I were expecting, which never came, was the fact that Emmett Till in Money, Mississippi, that happened the exact same year that she was born. And we just felt like culturally contextually that would kind of like inform her childhood in some way of growing up, but it never came up, and it would have felt extremely insincere to try to force it in any way if it wasn't part of her childhood. And so but I do think that looking at it from the outside, I mean, it's a region that's kind of like, you know, it's got a not great history in a lot of regards. And so I think it would have been nice to kind of frame her story, if it was not told in the first person, to kind of frame a lot of things that she grew up around, but wasn't necessarily, you know, didn't want to talk about. But yeah, there's, you know, Cleveland, Mississippi as well, where she went to school. I think her being the only Black athlete on her team, that was important, but it wasn't really significant to her. So it wasn't a huge part of her story. So I think putting some of those things in context, we would have liked to do, but she didn't want to, so we didn't.
So I see, you know, I gotta ask about Shaq, you know, because I see he's an executive producer, and it makes me curious about, there is a conversation right now in the NBA and in the sort of WNBA, and I think two different ways about, you know, how we see women's athletics, how we see the WNBA in the context of sort of the commercial way in which we consume, you know, athletics. Is there a plan to sort of use this film to pour gasoline on that conversation, or to engage people and use the story to you know, extend that conversation?
Yeah, I would love Lindsay to hop in on this, but just from my perspective, yeah, I mean, that's what we do as documentary filmmakers, is pour gasoline on the conversation. I think, I mean, as somebody who knows very little about basketball, it was like jaw-dropping to me to find out the discrepancy, especially the financial discrepancy between what it means to be a WNBA player and an NBA player, that the highest paid WNBA player makes less than the lowest paid NBA player. I just could not believe that was true. And that just seemed like an accepted fact. And so my hope is, and I think Shaq, I've just been amazed by his openness to have that conversation. And I think that's something that he's interested in, and that he recognizes that how unfair of an outcome it was for Lucy. But that's about as far as my knowledge goes. I'm going to pass it over to Liz.
Thanks, Ben. No, I mean, that was great. I think, I mean, when it comes to women's sports, so often it's just portrayed as very derivative of men's sports. And I think Lucy's story really kind of shows the very serious drawbacks that come with doing that. Obviously, she was put into a sports arena and benefited so much from it, but at the same time, it's always women kind of on the tails of a system that is built by and for men. And what I think is so exciting about the way that Ben and the entire team made this film was that they showed that for a moment in time, you know, women's sports, at least at that school, they were ascendant. They were ahead of men's sports. And I think that's so exciting, and kind of makes what happened to her later, you know, when she finally ran out of games to win, so to speak, all the more tragic, that she was given this option to work directly within the male model, where she was thriving in the female model, and kind of would have potentially had more of an opportunity to expand that female model, but again, hit that dead end. And I mean, you can say that this was back then and that there are opportunities now, but in the NCAA, and of course the professional leagues, we are seeing that again and again. Women are facing many of the same challenges that Lucy faced. And so I do think that there's a major opportunity to continue to add to that conversation through this story. And I'm tremendously grateful for someone as with as much credibility and renown as Shaq to kind of take this cause up for himself. I think it will only continue to add to it, and I'm really excited to see where it goes.
Yeah, I think about it like I'm a documentary filmmaker. We're all documentary filmmakers, and I've been like saying for years, like, so I go back a minute and at this for a minute, like, documentaries are some of the most popular films out there. They're the best films. They're the best storytelling, the best editing. they're the most malleable. They just have to be marketed. I always felt that, I deeply believe that. And now all of a sudden you're starting to see what happens when actually you start to put some money behind, marketing documentary. It's really starting to flourish. And I think in women's sports, I get into this argument with my son who's 16 and his little cousin who plays basketball. And when a women's game comes on, they'll turn the channel, they'll throw shade on it, and they're not as good or it's not as exciting. And it makes me realize that their framing is distorted, and I think films like this can help reframe, and change that. And I think that's what's exciting about this film. I just went on, that was a little soapbox thing. I'm supposed to be moderating, but I just went on a soapbox. But we have another question around the context and around the time, which is, might gender, and anyone can take this, might gender, race, and region, all of these intersections be the reason why the history books omitted her contribution to sports?
I think without question. My mom, who's a sociologist, would definitely support that theory of intersectionalism. I think, like Delta State, where Lucy played, right? That Coliseum. It's named to this day the Walter Sillars Coliseum. That's where Lucy played. And Walter Sillars was one of the longest serving politicians in the Mississippi legislature, and an odious racist. I mean, one of the most committed segregationists in the history of the South. And just factually, that's who he was. And his name is still up there. And he wouldn't have given a penny to an integrated school, especially not one where Lucy Harris, a Black woman, was the superstar and the best player ever to grace the court. And it's still that way. And so it's kind of in, 1 year prior, they didn't have a women's basketball team. 5 years prior, there had never been a Black student at Delta State. 10 years prior, the Mississippi state legislature was, holding back men's college basketball teams from competitions elsewhere that may include Black players on the other team. That's the world of this part of the country. And it's not like all over, and so thinking about all of those things and thinking about why is the story, why are these boxes of photographs and boxes of films sitting in the back corner of this archive, I think it's all of those things that intersected to, throw shade on Lucy's incredible life. And I think it's impossible not to look at those, societal elements as a huge reason that she wasn't given her due.
One of the most, poignant emotional moments for me in the movie was when she talked about, being offered, the opportunity to be drafted to play with and against the men, and her decision not to do that. And respecting that of her decision in the moment, but wondering, what do you think would have, if she were in this time today, if that decision would have been any different, and what's the corollary there? And I'm wondering this for you, Lindsay, that notion of, men, I can't compete against men because they're stronger, or the notion of, this is just a publicity stunt and I don't want to be you. And I found that to be very insightful of her, that she saw that. Whether or not that's the truth, I don't know. But what do you think was happening with her in that moment?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, Ben and I have speculated about this. I think it's really hard to be the first. It's really hard to forge a path yourself, and in so many ways, that's what she was doing, right? And she wasn't just forging a path in terms of gender. She was doing it as a Black woman. She was doing it as a woman who came from you know, a family that didn't make that much money. She wasn't. I mean, I can't speak to the amount of support that she had in her life, but she was figuring a lot of this out on her own, right? I mean, the way that anyone would be. And I think it's really poignant to think about what might have been with her, and exciting to see what has happened for a lot of the women that have come after her. But there are so many women, there are so many Lucys around us today who are also fighting, you know, maybe not the same battles, but similar ones. And I think it would be just a beautiful memory or a way of honoring Lucy's legacy to kind of find those people around us, those Lucys, and help support them as well, because isn't that what we would wish for her, and I think what we would wish for those around us as well, and for ourselves in many ways. So that's kind of what I see in her story.
Yeah, I think, filmmaking is obviously a collaborative process. There's so many people that work to allow film to be realized. A lot of times, for instance, the editor isn't Stephanie. I don't know if you met Lucy, but oftentimes the editor doesn't get to meet the subjects of these films. It's a very sort of direct and intimate relationship, often with the director or a DP or a producer. And those spaces sort of, it's the trust, right? And it's like the vulnerability and all those things. Can you talk a little bit? The reason why I'm setting this up is because we have a question here sort of about the relationship between the interviewer and you, Ben, and Lucy, and the fact that you're a white man and she's a Black woman going into those spaces. Could that have prevented her from opening up fully or revealing some of the things that maybe she wanted to talk about? And that she did not mention that the less talented white women on the Olympic team all went on to make lucrative lives in sports, whereas Lucy did not.
I think there's no question. Not only am I a white guy on the other side of the Interrotron, I'm also a stranger in many senses of the word. And at the same time, I also think that Lucy, what I knew of Lucy, and I got to know her, and actually everybody here got to meet Lucy at the premiere in New York at Tribeca, and just talking at length with her kids and getting to know her better, and talking to her college roommate and friends, and after the fact. Lucy, even to her closest friends, never really put down anyone else. That was just her personality. Even if she kind of knew, I mean, you see it in the movie, right? Like, she easily could have said, like, yeah, we're way better than the men's team, but she said, she didn't comment on it, right? And I think it was, we just tried to show Lucy for how we experienced her. And the thing that I experienced of her, and that I've experienced of her since with her family and with her friends, is she's just a very fine person who basically never put down anyone else, and really was not, although she spoke the truth, she was not someone who was keen to dwell on regret or negativity. She was really someone who wanted to focus on the fun and the joy. And I think it's really important to say, and this is something that Stephanie was really adamant about, and I think really shines through in the film, is yes, it's a story of a huge missed opportunity and a huge misconnection between one of the greatest talents we've had in this country and what could have been a fortune or a great career and fame and all that kind of stuff. This is also the story of someone who loved basketball and got to play it for how she perceived it is a long time, and really was satisfied in many ways with that. Like, Lucy herself was not hugely regretful. She she says, you know, I have good memories about basketball. She loved playing. She didn't do it for the fame or the championship. She liked winning, but I think it's important to remember that Lucy was really fulfilled in achieving and expressing her love of the game and being able to play. And like, you know, the film takes you in there to that AIAW championship, the first one, where they win unexpectedly against Immaculata. And it's like, is there any more exciting place on earth in history than in that court on that night? And she was there at the center of that, leading that charge. You know, I could just tell from the way she told that story that that was just such a high mark moment. So I think it's important to remember too, like the joy that that Lucy had and exuded to us, and how she told her stories and thought about that period of her career.
Yeah, she was
That's
really.
a perfect.
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to get to you, Stephanie, on this one, because that's a perfect segue to this next comment question, which is Lucia exemplified Black joy. I would love to learn more about her family. It seems like even though she did not receive the success she deserved in basketball, the story hints at her personal successes at experiencing joy within herself and within her family. And for you, Stephanie, sort of, you know, being in a position to really, you know, take this material and then frame it in your way, from your perspective, what that meant for you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because what I was going to say is that she was a very generous person, and it never felt like she needed to bring anyone else down in order for herself to still be confident. Like she recognized that, yeah, maybe if I were a man, I would have made millions of dollars, but that doesn't mean that the men don't deserve to get millions of dollars. That was all, you know, so she was able to sort of be both of those things. And as far as the family, one of my favorite moments or most poignant moments is when she's talking about wanting to make her parents proud. And so for me, like her love for her family, you know, both, you know, her parents, her siblings and her children, I think is incredibly important to her story and just the fulfillment that she had in her life.
Mm. So now, you know, you've made the film, and as we know, you know, you want to have it reach an audience. What are the plans? Where are you with the release of the movie? Are there any? You know, I know we've got the Oscar voting coming up, so now you're on pins and needles about that. But what is the plan for beyond the awards and all that, getting you know, this film seen and talked about it in conversation with people around the country?
Yeah, so obviously the film lives on one of the most visited websites on the planet, on the New York Times website, which was the best place to launch it. But, you know, we've been doing everything we can to get this story out there. But in the past week, after Lucy passed away, and, you know, her son called me and said, you know, we need to take every opportunity now to tell this story. We as a team are utterly galvanized to make sure that everybody, first, every American has learned this story, has heard it, has understood Lucy's significance, and then the world. You know, she's a significant person globally. She's the first person to score a basket, you know, in Olympics women's basketball history. And so our ambition is huge. We want Lucy to be a household name, and we're in lockstep with her family in, you know, bringing that campaign forward. There has been an unprecedented groundswell of interest from the press, from basically every major news outlet. Every major television network has picked up on Lucy's story, some very poignant and touching tributes over the past week. And so we just hope the momentum keeps going, and we're excited to work with Lucy's family to bring the story to the next step, and get that YouTube views up into the tens of millions.
That's great. And I think, the New York Times is a terrific partner. And I was just curious, Lindsay, with projects like these, do you have the ability to sort of resurface, like because the conversation is going to be ongoing about women's athletics, equity in sports. Are you able to sort of, take pieces like this and sort of repurpose them and give them new life as the journalism continues around this issue?
Yep, absolutely. And that's something that we're committed to doing, obviously not just through the Oscar campaign or even in the weeks, after her tragic passing. But I think as more kind of, I guess, news comes up around women's basketball, the history of basketball, really anything, I mean, particularly in the opinion department, we can just embed the video. And so as articles go viral, so too can a video, and they just complement each other really well. So I think that is the virtue of being part of what at this point is a media company as opposed to just, a newspaper company, is that we have a lot of different ways to tell and resurface stories. And they're certainly not, in a film like this, which is evergreen, certainly not tied to the date that it was released by any means. We can continue to promote it for years to come on all channels we have available to us.
Well, you've all made a wonderful film, Ben, Brandon, Stephanie, and Lindsay. Hats off to you. I hope everyone here can share with a friend or family member or a 16-year-old nephew who's throwing shade on women's basketball. We got to turn these kids around. And I'm going to hand it back over to Elizabeth. But thank you so much for sharing this with me. And look forward to seeing more from Breakwater Studios.
Thank you, Pete. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for being here for tonight and for bringing this incredible story to the world. I just want to echo what Pete said, to share this with everyone so more and more people see it. It's really a beautiful story. So I just want to say again, thank you for joining us this evening. Though today's program is virtual, MOAD is open to the public Wednesday through Sunday, and we currently have 5 beautiful exhibitions on view. So check out moadsf.org for all our programming, virtual and in person. We have a monthly African Diaspora Film Club where we discuss documentaries by and about people of the Black world. So check that out. You can follow the link that I put in the chat to share your thoughts about today's program on our virtual program survey. And of course, if anybody is so moved, we do take donations to support the work that we do at the museum, and you can do that on our website as well. And lastly, if you're part of the Academy, please vote to nominate this incredible documentary short, The Queen of Basketball, to be included in the Best Documentary Short category. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.